I'm Ed German. Join me on Friday nights for Friday Night Soul here on 88.3 FM WLIW and WLIW.org/radio for the best in soul, Latin soul, disco, and old school hip-hop. That's Friday at 8 p.m. at 88.3 WLIW FM and WLIW.org/radio, Long Island's only NPR station.
It's crazy to even imagine what it must be like trying to do senior year of high school in this 2020 pandemic, racial terror, election craziness. So instead of imagining, one young woman lets us inside an audio diary like you've never heard before. Snap judgment. Do not miss it.
Saturday afternoon at 1.
I'm Kai Rizdal. You're listening to 88.3 WLIW FM and WLIW.org/radio, Long Island's only NPR station.
Marketplace is supported by TIAA, who knows clients' passion will never run out, nor will TIAA's commitment not only to get clients to retirement, but through it. More at TIAA.org/neverrunout.
All right, 2020. It is over. We are done with you. Looking ahead, it is unclear what the economic story of 2021 will be, but safe to say, still got a very long path ahead. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by X-Chair, introducing the XHMT Heat and Massage Work Chair, a home office chair with heat and massage therapy plus dynamic variable lumbar support at xchair.com. And by Mimecast, a cloud email security and resilience companion for Microsoft 365, safeguarding your company against phishing and risks of ransomware. Mimecast.com, relentless protection, resilient world. And by Edison Research, dedicated to quality consumer research and public opinion polling for corporations and organizations worldwide. Learn more at edisonresearch.com/marketplace.
In Los Angeles, I'm Rima Freis, in for Kai Rizdal. It is Friday, the 1st of January, 2021. Good to have y'all along, and Happy New Year. We are in a strange economy right now. The U.S. stock market made a pretty wild comeback and ended the year at record highs. That is against the backdrop of a pandemic that has taken the lives of more than 340,000 people and left millions jobless and hungry. The president, after holding up the $900 billion pandemic relief package and dangling the possibility of a government shutdown, finally signed the legislation. And now some much-needed help is on its way. Here to talk more about the week that was and what we might see in this new year, I've got Gina Smilak from the New York Times and David Gura. Hey, you two.
Hey, Rima.
Hey, Rima.
Hey, so I'm going to start with you, David. So we had this week in which the president waited several days to sign this pandemic relief bill. And it got off to a rocky start because, there was confusion about how the delays would impact the rollout of this money. And we're starting to see some of those relief checks reach people's bank accounts now. But what do we know about how quickly this package is going to be felt across the economy?
Well, we know there's going to be some kind of delay. There is some clumsiness in terms of how this was handled. You mentioned the president was reluctant to sign this legislation, even when everyone thought that he would. It was sent down to Mar-a-Lago, where he was for the holidays. He ended up not signing it, and so he signed it after this deadline expired. As you mentioned, there's some good stuff in here for people who are needing help, an extension of unemployment benefits. There are these pandemic unemployment programs that were helping 11 or 12 million people. Those are going to be extended. They're going to get benefits for another 10 or 11 weeks, depending on how this rollout goes, and those state payments are going to be upped as well. We're going to have eviction protections, some rental assistance as well. So it is going to help people who need it. But the debate continues over the size of these direct payments to Americans. It's $600 in that legislation. There was some hope on the president's part and on the part of many Democrats and Republicans that it would be up to $2,000. The House passed that legislation separately. It seems stuck, though. So we're at this precipice. We're waiting for the new Congress to come in. It seems unlikely anything's going to happen before they're sworn in. And I think there'll be a lot of people in America who need that money, who are hoping for that money, who will just have to continue to wait with this uncertainty.
Right. And so on that note, Gina, what could realistically happen from January 3rd in a couple days when the new Congress is sworn in till, Biden takes the presidency on January 20th. I mean, could we see any legislation? What's actually realistic? And if not, what challenges could lawmakers and the administration face in trying to get more money and help to folks this year?
Right. The good news is that $600 checks are already going out to the people who qualify for them. I think the real question is going to be whether they can get that bigger expanded check out. And that's clearly going to be the priority. I think it's probably unlikely that you're going to see any quick movement on that in Congress. The reason being that we're not actually sure who's going to be in control of the Senate yet. We've still got these runoff races in Georgia. And so I think for a while, at least, it's not going to make a lot of sense to get something through quickly. You're going to have to kind of see how that plays out. And I think then, once we have that happen, you're going to sort of see how the cards are stacked from there. It could be pretty pivotal. If the Democrats have control of both houses, it's going to be a very different Congress than if Republicans retain control of the Senate.
Right. And David, I want to go to something I mentioned at the top of the show about this strange economy that we're in right now. So financially, people are hurting and things in this world feel pretty awful. Yet in the world of financial markets, things are going pretty well. I have Kai's voice in my head and he's saying the stock market is not the economy and the economy is not the stock market, which is true. But can you explain what's going on here? Like, why are we seeing all these all-time highs in the markets?
Yeah, I would ever quibble with Kai's truism, of course,
right.
and I think that's true. These are separate things, and who's doing well largely are these big companies, and they have been over the course of the last year. But when you look at the story of this economy, it's really the story of the consumer. It's the story of Americans who have lost their jobs, have tried to get them back. And if you just take a look at the landscape right now, it seems pretty bleak. You have a recovery that was sputtering along and is now slowing. Joblessness is still a huge issue. We're looking ahead to another jobs report that's likely to not be great. And if you look at weekly first-time claims, this last week still had 800,000 jobs, 800,000 filings for the first time. That's incredibly high. And I wouldn't say people are inured to it, but when we first saw those numbers at the beginning of this crisis, it was a real shocker, and it's been a persistent thing that we've seen week after week after week. So the economy as a whole isn't doing great. And as you mentioned, the background music to all of this has to do with the coronavirus, as it has since the start. And we see the trouble rolling out these vaccines. We see restaurants and bars struggling as we see the incidence of cases kicking up across the country. There's a lot to make consumers nervous. There's a lot to make economists nervous as they look at the health of the U.S. economy overall.
Gina, anything you want to add on that, on why we're seeing these record highs in the stock market?
I think one thing that, it gets said often, so I'm not going to pile on too hard here, but the Fed is clearly part of this story. Low rates, good news for the stock market. QE, they're buying, a lot of bond purchases. They're doing a lot of bond purchases through this program commonly called quantitative easing, or QE, and that tends to push people out of less risky assets, which have very low rates, and into the stock market through what they call the portfolio rebalance channel. And so I think that combo, that can definitely be good news for stocks. It's not the entire story of what's happening in the stock market, but it's not irrelevant.
Well, on the topic of the Fed, I want to stick with that for a minute. You recently wrote in the New York Times about how this last year, the Fed basically changed forever. Like you just said, it slashed interest rates, made these massive bond purchases, and rolled out these never-before-tried loan programs. Thinking ahead, do we expect the Fed to be as involved in 2021?
I think it's going to be a really interesting year for them, because part of the Fed's job in times of recovery is just to kind of stay out of the way to the extent possible. Don't raise rates, be very patient, just keep things going the way they're going. And so I think that's probably the Fed you're going to see in 2021. That said, they're buying a lot of bonds, so they're going to have to figure out whether they want to continue doing that, change the sort of tenor of it at all. And so we're clearly going to see some kind of activism there. And then they've had their wings clipped a little bit when it comes to these emergency loan programs. Congress basically said, hey, don't restart at least sort of the more consumer-facing, Main Street-facing versions of these. And so I think, we're clearly not going to see the kind of experimentation along those lines that we saw in 2020.
Gina Smilak from the New York Times and David Gura, thanks so much, you two.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Wall Street was closed this New Year's Day, but don't worry, we've still got some numbers for you. Like I just talked about with David and Gina, people are going to start feeling the effects of that pandemic relief package soon. A lot of what's in there is an extension of the original relief Congress passed back in March. People can get jobless benefits for longer. They'll get federal help on top of what their state gives them. And there are more loans in there for small businesses. But as Marketplace's Samantha Fields reports, some of the original protections have already run out.
When Congress passed that new $900 billion COVID relief bill just before Christmas, one thing it did not do was extend the requirement that many employers offer paid sick days for people who get COVID. Tanya Goldman at the Center for Law and Social Policy says that will have public health consequences.
We're at a moment when the country is experiencing over 200,000 new cases a day of the virus. And this is a program that one study found reduced COVID by 15,000 cases a day.
Before Congress passed the emergency sick time mandate in March, Goldman says more than 30 million workers in the U.S. did not even have a single paid sick day. Most of them are in low-wage, high-risk jobs in grocery stores and restaurants.
So these are workers who may face the choice where they cannot stay home even if they are sick with COVID because they would lose income that they need to pay for rent, to pay for groceries.
Along with paid sick time, Congress also let paid family leave benefits expire as of today. Those gave parents up to 12 weeks of paid time off to take care of their kids if their school or daycare closed because of COVID. Vicky Szabo is with the think tank New America.
That means that in some families, parents may need to make choices about whether to keep their job or whether to provide care for their children. And disproportionately, we know that it's women who have taken a step back during this pandemic.
Even with the 12 weeks of paid leave in place. And Szabo says,
the elimination, the expiration of these provisions only make that outcome more likely.
Employers can still choose to offer paid sick and family leave. And if they do, they can still claim a tax credit. But Ruth Milkman, a labor sociologist at the City University of New York, says without a mandate,
I suspect that most of them will only do it for the workers that they consider to be the most valuable, like in the past, professionals and managers.
Which means the people who need the benefits the most, she says, will once again be the least likely to get them. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
So here's a really sobering fact. According to experts, more Americans are going hungry right now than at any point since the census started keeping track in the late 90s. The pandemic relief package that we keep talking about, it does set aside new money, billions of dollars, for food stamp benefits and food banks. But the need, like I said, unlike anything we've seen before. We're going to take a close look now at Texas. Food banks there have been scrambling to feed people. They're getting double the number of families they did last year, while at the same time dealing with some pretty heavy budget cuts. From Houston Public Media, Elizabeth Troval has that one.
Quinn McGee wakes up early to get ahead of the long line of cars at the local food pantry in Southwest Houston on pickup days.
It's something to behold because you're looking at families literally inside and you see all these cars and it's like, wow.
McGee, who uses they and them pronouns, started getting food there in November. They have a partner and a 9-year-old son. The family has had gaps in paychecks due to unemployment and mental health leave. They've struggled to catch up with bills. McGee's family had never been to a food pantry before the pandemic. Now, coming home with groceries is a sigh of relief.
It's literally like, yay! I'm literally like, okay, I can rest easy just a little bit, just a little.
McGee says in the grocery bag, there's always fresh fruits and veggies, carrots, potatoes.
Apples, bananas, I've gotten strawberries, I've gotten mandarins.
They say it's nice to have a healthy alternative to the canned goods that can be high in sodium. But in the new year, it's likely that fewer fresh foods will make it into grocery bags like McGee's, thanks to a $2 million cut to a statewide grant program.
That translates to a 19 million pound loss of produce.
Celia Cole is CEO of Feeding Texas, an association of the state's 21 food banks.
That's produce we will not be able to get It's produce that will likely go to waste, and it's produce that could be nourishing hungry Texans at a time of unprecedented food insecurity due to the pandemic.
Feeding Texas estimates it's been serving around 1.8 million families each month during the pandemic. The Surplus Agricultural Products Grant Program pays for leftover produce from state farmers to be shipped to food banks. The Texas Department of Agriculture cut funding for the program to balance the statewide budget. At the Houston Food Bank, a forklift drives up to unload pallets of fresh mangoes from a truck trailer. Food Bank President Brian Green says the slashed budget means the organization will receive 100 fewer tractor-trailer loads like this over the next year. He says the program is a critical source of fresh fruits and vegetables.
It accounts for about 10% of our total distribution, and that's fairly consistent. I think of the food banks in Texas, and if you think in terms of produce, it's about a quarter of the produce that we receive.
Green says if you consider these cuts along with unprecedented demand and uncertainty around federal USDA funding, food banks are facing a potential food cliff. Celia Cole says local food banks still anticipate a delay in the first 3 months of 2021, which could mean they fall short about 29 million pounds of food each month.
Almost every single food bank is projecting a potential gap between the demand in their communities and their ability to meet that demand.
That's why Cole says there's an immediate need that this state program could help pay for now. She says she hopes when the state legislature convenes in January, it will immediately reverse the budget cut.
I'll say I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that the responsible thing to do would be to restore the funding for this fiscal year.
Cole says this program has received bipartisan support for nearly 20 years. In Houston, I'm Elizabeth Trofall for Marketplace.
Coming up,
they are unlimited in their use.
Wish I could say the same about my vacation time. But first, let's do the numbers. The markets are closed today for the New Year's holiday. So here are some other numbers. Nearly 20 million people are out of work and getting unemployment benefits. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, 14 million renters owe back rent, and more than a third of adults, 85 million Americans, say it is somewhat or very difficult to cover their usual expenses. The latest figures from the Department of Labor show 787,000 people filed new jobless claims during Christmas week. That's much better than the nearly 7 million people applying for benefits back in March, but it is also 4 times higher than the pre-pandemic normal. As we talked about with David and Gina, all of this in a year where the Dow rose 7.25%, the Nasdaq gained 43.6%, and the S&P 500 was up 16.25%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Omidyar Network, a social change venture that is reimagining how capitalism should work. Learn more about their efforts to recenter our economy around individuals, community, and societal well-being at omidyar.com. And by the Ranzetta Family Charitable Fund and Next Gen Personal Finance, a nonprofit organization that believes all students benefit from having a financial education before they cross the stage at high school graduation. Online at ngpf.org. And by Atlassian. 83% of Fortune 500 companies use collaboration software from Atlassian, like Jira or Trello, enabling teams to keep aligned to key goals and connected to one another, helping businesses the size of small countries stay agile. Atlassian.com.
I'm Ed German. Join me on Friday nights for Friday Night Soul here on 88.3 FM WLIW and WLIW.org/radio for the best in soul, Latin soul, disco, and old school hip hop. That's Friday at 8 p.m. at 88.3 WLIW FM and WLIW.org/radio. Long Island's only NPR
on the next Radio Lab.
This is the only place in the world that is U.S. soil and people who are born here are not citizens.
American Samoa on the next Radio Lab.
Saturday afternoon at 3.
Hi, I'm Diane Michelli, General Manager of 88.3 WLIW FM, here to thank you for making our December fundraising efforts a great success. We're looking forward to continuing to serve the needs of Eastern Long Island and Southern Connecticut all year long because of you. Happy New Year!
Good ideas can be slow to catch on.
The reality check hit pretty hard, pretty fast, and I started to realize that, holy cow, this is actually going to be a while.
On the next How I Built This, Joel Clark struggled for years to make his pancake mix a success.
And why unions love their giant inflatable rats. That's coming up on the next Planet Money.
And How I Built This from NPR.
Saturday mornings at 6 on 88.3 WLIW FM.
I'm Kai Rizdal. You're listening to 88.3 WLIW FM and WLIW.org/radio, Long Island's only NPR station.
This is Marketplace. I'm Rima Chreis. After decades of debate, the Trump administration next week is planning to auction off drilling rights in Alaska. More specifically, Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Those against drilling say they want to protect the land, which is home to some 250 animal species, including caribous and wolverines. But here's what you may find surprising. In this long-awaited bidding process, turns out there's not a lot of interest. Here's Marketplace's Scott Tong.
A lot of things were in fashion in the mid-'80s. Big hair, fanny packs, and oil giants wanting to drill in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, or ANWR. All have mostly gone out of style. Tim Bradner co-publishes the Alaska Economic Report.
One thing that has really interested a lot of us in Alaska who follow these things is how ambivalent the major oil companies have been in ANWR for years. That could be because they sense the toxic politics.
Decades of environmental opposition mean a risk of lawsuits against oil companies considering ANWR, plus corporate reputational risk, Bradner says. And drilling in remote Alaska is not cheap, warns energy and environment lawyer David Hayes, a former top official at the Interior Department.
The price of oil is not high. The expense of drilling in Alaska is high. Meanwhile, there are many places in the world that are much cheaper to drill for oil than the Alaskan Arctic.
So most, if not all, oil giants are expected to sit out the bidding, which would mean low lease prices and measly royalties for the government. Not exactly what Congress predicted 3 years ago when it authorized leasing and assumed $1 billion in royalties.
The bids that are put in are going to be nowhere near what Congress said would likely occur.
Low bids mean drilling rights could go for bargain prices, though, and Bradner at the Alaska Economic Report predicts some interest, perhaps among state and local players.
The geology does look very good, and even given all the bad PR and the politics, I just can't imagine that somebody, maybe just individuals, aren't going to submit bids.
Perhaps anticipating lukewarm interest, Alaska's State Development Commission just got the okay to bid itself, to make a grab for potentially valuable land and eventually flip it or partner with oil companies. The deadline for bids came yesterday, and Wednesday, they'll be unsealed. In Washington, I'm Scott Tong for Marketplace.
3 words to remember to get you started on Monday. Marketplace Morning Report. Check it out. Drilling in Alaska, or anywhere really, is about energy generation. But just as important, maybe more, is how to store that energy. Like the iPhone that is sitting in front of me right now, trying to grab my attention with notifications, uses lithium-ion batteries. That's the same technology that is in my laptop, in my AirPods, my Tesla. Just kidding, I don't have a Tesla. But if I did, lithium-ion batteries, they power electric cars too. And the technology, while it is helping pave the way towards a renewable energy future, some wonder, is it actually the answer to our bigger energy needs? From KUNR in Reno, Nevada, Noah Gleck explains.
Venture outside the cities of Las Vegas and Reno and into the high desert of Nevada, and you'll see a whole lot of wide, open space, mostly full of sagebrush and desert grasses.
You've arrived.
But here in the Silver Peak range of central Nevada, there's something else buried underneath the ancient volcanic rock: lithium. Lithium has been used for decades in everything from antidepressant medications to ceramics. Now it's being harvested in massive quantities, primarily for electric vehicles. But is it safe?
It poses additional risk because it stores more energy. The energy density of lithium ion is higher than most other batteries.
Andrew Klock is with the National Fire Protection Association. He says even with some famous lithium-ion battery explosions, he's not concerned about the safety of electric vehicles. That's because EVs and other devices have what's called battery management systems that alert users when something's wrong.
My Android the other day told me I've got too many apps open. It's overheating. Shut them down immediately. So that's a good management system, right?
For one battery cell, sure. But Donald Sadoway, a professor of materials science and engineering at MIT, says it's hard to keep large-scale systems cool, like systems that store energy from wind or solar power.
The lithium ion requires safety measures to be put in play so that you don't get thermal runaway, which could lead to ultimately to fire.
Back in September, an energy storage plant in the UK using lithium exploded and caught fire, and another in Arizona exploded in 2019, injuring 9 first responders. Plus, lithium-ion batteries lose capacity over time, Sadoway says, making them less than ideal for electric vehicles.
You know, on your phone and your laptop computer, on day one, you've got plenty of runtime. On day one plus 5 years, it's not the same.
He says the challenge now is figuring out how to come up with a solution without adding to the price. Sadoway and his partner at MIT are experimenting with battery technology using molten salts. Others are taking up the challenge too. Like Larry Zulch, he's the CEO of Invinity Energy Systems. He's working with another metal, vanadium.
It's normally used to harden steel. Henry Ford used it in the Model T.
His company is developing vanadium flow batteries for renewable energy storage, but the chemistry isn't perfect here either. Unlike lithium, vanadium batteries need to be bigger and heavier. Think shipping container size. Still, Zulch says the positives outweigh the negatives.
They are unlimited in their use. You don't wear them out by cycling them. You don't wear them out over time.
And there are other significant benefits. Vanadium poses less of a fire risk than lithium-ion. Plus, Zulch says much of the world's vanadium supply can be found in existing industrial waste.
There's enough out there that we can, in effect, mine our own residue of the past for a long time for vanadium.
Research into vanadium and other alternatives is still underway, with mass production and adoption years away. Still, while researchers may disagree over the exact technology we should use, they all agree we need to get off fossil fuels now. And that means, for the time being, lithium-ion isn't going anywhere. In Reno, I'm Noah Glick for Marketplace.
And this final note on the way out. If the numbers I read earlier were any indication, this last year was unbelievably grim. And the sad reality is that it may get even darker before we're totally out of this thing. But I want to end the show on a lighter note. And I spotted this article in Vice News that I thought I'd share because, I don't know, made me feel a little more optimistic. Basically, it said, despite all the uncertainty, science tells us that we are happier human beings when we plan things, when we actively imagine and anticipate certain events. It helps maintain the dopamine levels in our brain. Obviously, that is hard to do right now in a pandemic, but they can be super small things, like a weekly call with a grandparent or planning to try out a new recipe. As one of the researchers in the article put it, there are still things to look forward to. They just may look a little different than before.
Marketplace is supported by GEP, helping transform supply chains with strategies, services, and software, including GEP Smart and GEP Next, AI-based digital procurement and supply chain platforms. And by Staples, with supplies to get business done, from ink and toner cartridges to technology like webcams and networking accessories. More at Staples stores or staples.com. And by Charles Schwab. Schwab understands that wealth management is personal. That's why Schwab offers flexible, personalized financial planning crafted for their investors' individual goals. Learn more at schwab.com.
All right, that is all for this week. We've got to go. Our theme music was composed by BJ Liederman. Marketplace's executive producer is Nancy Fergali. Nancy Cassett is the managing director of news. And I'm Lima Jerez. All right, we'll see you on Monday. This is
Hi, I'm Diane.